Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, allow me to extend a warm welcome to the Harold Pratt House in New York for the launch of 100 Lives. We would ask you to take this time to check and make sure your mobile phones are in the off position, as a courtesy to the presenters in this evening's program. Please join me in welcoming to the stage President of the Carnegie Corporation and co-founder of 100 Lives, Mr. Vartan Gregorian.
Good evening and welcome. I'm honored to be here tonight as both a proud American and Armenian, and to introduce you to the 100 Lives program and its inspired architect, my friend Ruben Bartanian. It's most fitting that 100 Lives is being launched from New York. After all, this is the city of Ambassador Henry Morgenthau, who in 1915 alerted the world to the impending destruction of Armenians in the Ottoman Empire. It's also the city whose main newspaper, the New York Times, provided a detailed chronicle of a near annihilation of Armenians more than a century ago. New York is the birthplace of President Teddy Roosevelt, who advocated for war against Germany due to deportations of Belgians and against the Ottoman Empire in reaction to the massacres of Armenians, which he called the greatest crime of the war. New York is a home to the United Nations. It's also home to Human Rights Watch, Human Rights First, organizations dedicated to the prevention of abuses of power and the maintenance of universal human rights. Let me remind you also that the first English edition of Franz Werfel's 40 Days of Musadag was published here in New York in 1934. It was the book that saved the Armenian Genocide from benign neglect in Europe and gave the Armenians a literary symbol of survival and renewal. We also know that it was from New York that Near East Relief mobilized the American people, bringing together Catholics, Protestants, and Jews, Democrats and Republicans in a nonpartisan national mobilization effort to rescue the remnants of Armenian people and other victims of World War I. Initially, it aimed to raise $100,000, but succeeded in collecting more than $100 million. It was the largest philanthropic effort in America's history and saved more than 1 million refugees, including some 130,000 orphans. Tonight, we honor the spirit and fortitude of our grandfathers and grandmothers. We also honor the many people of conscience, courage, integrity, indeed decency, who a century ago stepped forward to help Armenians when they were most in need. Thanks to them, the Armenian people survived against terrible odds. As a result, an inherent sense of gratitude lives in the heart of every Armenian. Thus, while the 100 Lives program is about the Armenian Genocide centennial, it's not about the genocide alone, but it's about the rebirth of a nation and an enduring belief in the common bonds of humanity. I think of no one who embodies this spirit, more than our next speaker. A celebrated businessman and philanthropist, Ruben Bartanian seeks to rekindle the spirit of generosity in each one of us, to make us worthy of our ancestors. He has captured that spirit and forged it into the program we are here to announce tonight. I also would like to add one thing. Ruben has degrees, many degrees, from Russia and Harvard, but he is imbued with the idealism and humanism of Russian literature, Pushkin, Lermontov, Dostoevsky, Turgenev, Tolstoy, Akhmatova, and many more. And also Armenian humanism, Grigor Narekatsi, all the way to Moses Khorenatsi, and going all the way Yerishe, but also to go to Armenia, Yerishe Charents, Shiraz, and many others I don't want to invoke. The fact is, he's an idealist, humanist, and a successful doer rather than big talker. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you a real man, a wonderful man, a great friend, Ruben Bartanian.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you, Artan, for this so nice introduction. By all your support you're doing for me all these years and all my projects. And I want to say good evening and thank you for all my friends and partners who came from different parts of the world here, and my American friends who today decided to come to this event. I want to apologize and ask forgiveness by being very emotional. For me, it's a very emotional day today. And I prepare a very nice, long, official speech, but I decided not to do it. I said I want to speak by my heart. Many people ask me many times, why are you doing this project? What's the key goal for you? Why are you doing this? And I look myself and say, you know, I'm 46 years old man who was born in Soviet Union in Armenia, grew up in Armenia, which was a part of Soviet Union, went to Russia, saw the perestroika, started investment banking when the Soviet Union collapsed and Russia started a new life. And after 25 years running the investment bank and building one of the top investment bank, I sold it, and I'm moving now a new journey about what is the main purpose of the life. And looking back, I said, I'm doing this all by being privileged because of my parents, but also because something happened 100 years ago with my grandfather. There's a story of the one person, but the story is many, many other families in Armenia. He was 8 years old when the genocide started in Turkey, and his parents was killed, and his many brothers and sisters died or disappeared during the move from the Erzurum and Argesh to the Armenia. He was saved by Russian army, and later he came to the Echmiadzin, and he got lucky because American missionaries, which Bartan mentioned, which raised amazing amount of money, sent people to Armenia, and basically they saved the life of more than 100,000 kids. And they allowed us today to stay and talk about project that we want, believe it will be very important, not only for Armenians, but also for entire world. This story is not unique. Like I said, it will be thousands and thousands of stories. And when in 2009, I spoke with Nubar, my partner and friend, about this, and said, you know what, I think we are unique from point of learning how to use this second chance. And yes, we remember what happened with us. We remember and regret about the victims, what was really horrible, what's happened with the Armenian nation in the Ottoman Empire. But at the same time, I think after 100 years, we can say very clear message, we are strong and we are alive. And we are alive today, and I think it will be the best message to our own internal nation, but also to the world, saying, be alive is a very important element for us to position and to present the world, saying, despite what's happening with you, you can keep yourself, you can develop yourself, and you can contribute to the world. Armenians, it was 2 million Armenians was living in Ottoman Empire. 1.5 million people was killed or died during this 8 horrible years. And 500,000 survived and spread around the world. Today, 7 million diaspora living all over the world and 3 million in Armenia. And look what's been achieved. I think we can be proud what Armenians did for the world, but it's more important we stay like nation despite all what's happened with us. And we stay because somebody helped us, because somebody, despite all the problems with the First World War, despite all the problems of distance, went to Armenia from Scandinavian countries, from France, from Russia, from America. And this is amazing. When you're reading this whole story, I become really frustrated with I grew up being Soviet Armenian boy and didn't know about these stories, because unfortunately, with two empires created so big hiding of information, and we didn't know about the Americans' role to what we play to save the lives of Armenians in Armenia. And it is amazing, but looking at how many Americans been involved to doing this for us, how big amount of money. Bartan mentioned is $117 million. Today it's at $2.8 billion. It's amazing by number, and amazing by how many people been involved in this all. And saying thank you to them, I think, is very critical, because it's not just we've been saved, but we got the second chance to go to do something. And I think this project is about saying, yes, 100 years later, we're alive, We want to say thank you to people, to institutions, to countries who help us. And saying thank you means we are remembering what happened, we are demanding, but we are also alive. And so I want to say our major goal with this project, despite all the problems we are facing in Armenia and in other places, we want to say is a very important humanitarian action just to do something backward to the people who help you. And I believe it's a very close connection. It's a big bridge between the past, what happened with us 100 years ago, and the current situation. And this is why we're so proud to present today our major issue about the prize, what we're doing for humanitarians doing today. Very important things in different parts of the world. And the future, what we're doing with the grants for helping other people who need our help, who cannot afford themselves good education, like our kids, our grandparents couldn't get it 100 years ago. And so our project, if you look at the project is memorized to our grandparents, but also our grandson. So I think it's a big connection between our past and our future. And remembering is all, and trying to keep us all connected and keep the stories and keep the actions and doing something which will be crucial. So I think for us, it's time in 2015, time for action. Thank you.
Being Armenian means we are survivors. We're the sons and daughters of survivors, and we will be the fathers and mothers of survivors. Survivors of genocide. But just as the will to survive runs through our veins, so too does the desire to thrive. An Armenian sets no limits or borders to achievement. Armenians want to make a difference. This is what it means for us to be alive. We are among the world's leading scientists, engineers, entrepreneurs, philanthropists, artists, intellectuals, inventors, entertainers. As a people so nearly robbed of life, we do not take life for granted. Even in our darkest hours, there was a glimmer of light. A courageous few showed us there is always hope. Because of them, Armenians know life is only truly full when we step up and help others. To be alive is a gift. It means being grateful for being given a second chance, ensuring the stories of our survival are never forgotten. Taking responsibility for our destiny, and being true to this spirit by helping others, giving them courage. This is why 100 Lives exists. We want to make every life count. You don't have to be Armenian to be Armenian. You just have to be alive.
I am Armenian.
I am Armenian.
I am Armenian.
I am Armenian.
Yes, I am.
We would now like to introduce Ruben's fellow co-founder, CEO of Flagship Ventures, Nubar Afeyan.
We Armenians have one important thing in common. We are survivors. In fact, given our history, you could even say we've become super survivors. We're descendants of those who struggled and overcame seemingly impossible odds. We are here because we were given a second chance. My grandfather, Bedros, was such a survivor. While 1.5 million Armenians perished, he managed to escape the genocide with the help from very unlikely source. German officers working in the very same military that supported the Ottoman Turk during this campaign actually saved my grandfather. They were in the region during the construction of the Berlin-Baghdad Railway. And when I understood that story, I realized that the spirit that is within us as humans to help struggles sometimes and overcomes what the environment demands of us. And that is why my grandfather was saved, and that is why I'm here today. What does it truly mean to be a super survivor? What does it mean to defy the odds? Does it just mean not dying? Well, as you've heard tonight, for us it means overcoming the odds, reviving, standing up, thriving, and then giving back. And this notion
of going beyond just living, not taking life for granted, is a central force in my life, in business, in my personal life, but most importantly, in my optimism about the renewal of the Armenian nation. These are some of the motivations that led us to found this 100 Lives project. Of course, Ruben and I are not alone in our stories. Over the past century, descendants of genocide survivors have contributed greatly, globally. They've contributed to the arts, science, in business, in many aspects of life. From communities in Europe, such as the French singer Charles Aznavour, world-famous heart surgeon Lord Arad Darzi, chess grandmaster Tigran Bedrosian, moving to North America, tennis star Andre Agassi, film director Ado Megoyan, Academy Award-winning actress Cher, financier Kirk Kerkorian. South America, another tennis star, David Nalbandian, businessman, Eduardo Ernekian. And then finally to Australia with politicians such as Joe Hockey and Gladys Berejiklian. These are just some of the contributions of what Armenians have made around the world. And many of you are here in this room tonight. We are a diaspora that in some senses has been scattered across the world by trauma, but united by our gratitude and by overcoming a genocide. There are thousands of more stories. We've just begun to collect them, which will bring together survivors and saviors. You have to realize that at the moment of a genocide, there are not only perpetrators and victims, but there are survivors and there are saviors. And here's just one of them.
My grandparents perished during the genocide of the Armenians, and nothing of them ever been heard. I'm Vartan Melkonian. My father was rescued as a young boy and was brought to Lebanon, and I was born by the Karantina Maslach camp. I remember nothing of my mother. I was very young when she passed away, so I was sent to the Bird's Nest Orphanage. It was run by a Danish missionary called Maria Jacobsen, an eyewitness to the genocide herself. She had this old weathered gramophone, and I used to hear classical music drifting across the corridors. But when newcomers came, I had to leave and ended up on the streets. In the mid-70s, civil war broke out in Lebanon. I came to England. I was singing in the nightclubs in London. Then one day, I met two Omani princes. As a street child, you take an opportunity, and I persuaded them to write a piece of music with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, and that's when my conducting career began. Maria Jacobsen is the reason I give back what I know best: music.
The definition of a survivor who then became a thriver. Vartan Melkonian is with us tonight. Vartan, please rise and take a bow. There's another story I want to tell you about. She is known as Armenia's Joan of Arc, a woman who lived through uncountable horrors during the genocide and then heroically relived them through a book and a movie about her life. Her name is Aurora Mardigarian. This is Aurora's remarkable story.
In 1915, Aurora Mardiganian's life would change forever. That day in the Syrian desert, Ottoman soldiers assembled a group of Armenian girls to be crucified. 16 crosses were erected. Aurora was the 17th girl in line. At age 14, Aurora was orphaned by genocide, forced along with thousands of other Armenian women to march through mountains and wilderness, under a scorching sun, subject to unrelenting cruelty. An estimated 1.5 million of her countrymen died in the genocide. But Aurora lived. She escaped her persecutors and survived with the help of Russian soldiers and American missionaries, and made an epic 9,000-mile journey to Russia and then New York. And determined to make a difference, Aurora told her story to all who would listen. Her testimony was carried through newspaper articles, books, and made into the Hollywood film Ravished Armenia, which raised $20 million for humanitarian aid. It is for her extraordinary resilience and her ability to give back in spite of the suffering she faced that today we remember her. Recounting the story of her life, Aurora herself would often say that she was only alive by accident. We know differently.
Aurora, what an amazing woman, an amazing inspiration to all of us. This program is about saviors and survivors and looking to their descendants, the young people who will be passed the baton to carry forth their spirit. Now I'm honored to introduce to you Ani Karabashyan. Ani is a student at Gordon College from my home state of Massachusetts, where she's studying social work and sustainable development. She has a direct connection to our history as she is a member of Aurora's family. Ladies and gentlemen, Ani.
Thank you for that kind introduction. I learned about Aurora through my mother. This was 2 years ago, during my first trip to Armenia. Aurora's story is nothing short than pure inspiration. And I know my family feels truly privileged to be related to someone who could survive such a horrific tragedy and not let the experience demoralize her. Instead, she boldly retold her tale with the intention of not letting people forget the atrocities that Armenia faced during the genocide. Her story brings to my family a sense of hope, respect, and reverence towards those who survived. She inspires me to never forget what was done to those who were oppressed, to allow forgiveness into my heart, and to remember those who extended kindness at the risk of their own lives. So today, that spirit lives on. On behalf of 100 Lives, I am honored to announce the launch of the Aurora Prize for Awakening Humanity, a global humanitarian prize named after my relative and meant to pay tribute to her memory. The Aurora Prize will present a grant of $1 million annually to an individual or group who overcame great risk to their health, liberty, reputation, or livelihood by carrying out acts that enabled others to survive. Online nominations for the Aurora Prize will open in June of this year. This is the inaugural Aurora Prize presented in April 2016 at a ceremony in Yerevan, Armenia. The winner of that prize will be selected by an august group of human rights luminaries from around the world that we are proud to be associated with this award.
Introducing the selection committee members of the Aurora Prize for Awakening Humanity. Elie Wiesel, President of the Elie Wiesel Foundation for Humanity, Nobel Laureate. George Clooney, co-founder Not on Our Watch, humanitarian, performer, and filmmaker. Oscar Arias, former president of Costa Rica and Nobel laureate. Mary Robinson, former president of Ireland, former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Vartan Gregorian, 12th President of Carnegie Corporation of New York. Hina Jalani, former UN Special Representative of the Secretary General on Human Rights Defenders. Gareth Evans, former Foreign Minister of Australia, former President and CEO of the International Crisis Group, former UN Secretary General Advisor on Genocide.
Part of Aurora's family. But in many ways, we are all part of her family from this day forward. The name of Aurora hails from the Roman goddess of dawn. It symbolizes a new beginning, a rebirth, being alive. So if Aurora were here this evening, she would simply state, "Be Armenian, be alive." Thank you very much.
Everyone please welcome Mr. John Prendergast to the stage, founder of the Enough Project and strategic director of Not on Our Watch.
Thank you all for coming tonight. Since our organization, Not on Our Watch, was founded, my fellow board member, George Clooney, and I have regularly traveled into zones of war where people's villages were being burned because of the identity of their inhabitants, where women and girls were being raped because of their ethnicity, where people were being bombed because of their religion, and where people were being starved because of their race. There's a word for that, ladies and gentlemen. It is genocide. It is a word that makes people uncomfortable. It is a word that is often politically inconvenient. And it is a word that sparks fierce political debate. But it is a word that is fraught with meaning. It has a clear definition in international law. Genocide occurs when a party intends to destroy a group of people in whole or in part on the basis of their identity. Armenia was the first genocide of the 20th century. Darfur, the first genocide of the 21st century. And the horror continues there under the cover of darkness even today. And during this past century, the tools used by the orchestrators of genocide are hauntingly similar. It isn't just the destruction of human life. Places of worship were and are desecrated. Schools were and are closed and destroyed. People were and are displaced or deported into camps in the middle of the desert. Entire cultures were and are targeted for annihilation. There is a reason that 100 Lives and Not on Our Watch have forged the strategic partnership that we have. 100 Lives commemorates the genocide and celebrates the upstanders who heroically saved lives in Armenia and around the world. And until now, they were unremembered. I'm reminded of a line from Luke's Gospel, "And the servant is not even thanked because he is merely doing what he is supposed to do." And on the other side of the partnership, Not on Our Watch works to expose genocide and mass atrocities occurring today, to shine a spotlight to counter genocide, to, in hope, end genocide. All of us at 100 Lives and Not on Our Watch firmly believe that without a full historical account of the genocide in Armenia or that of the Holocaust, we cannot successfully confront today's mass atrocities in Sudan, in Congo, in Syria, in the Central African Republic. The list goes on. As Elie Wiesel has said, I quote, "It is memory that will save humanity. Hope without memory is like memory without hope." 100 Lives and Not on Our Watch is an alliance of memory and of hope. The collective voices in this room, right here tonight, contain enormous moral authority. For all of us, genocide in the past should not recede unremembered. For all of us, genocide in the present should not stand unchallenged. Ladies and gentlemen, Let us lift our voices in unison, even when it is inconvenient, and be heard to say, in response to genocide wherever it occurs in the world, not on our watch. Thank you very much. Elie Wiesel couldn't be here tonight, but he was able to record this very special message for all of us here in the room. Thank you.
My dear friends, I so wish I could be with you today. The project is important. I wouldn't say vital. What would society be? What would memory be? What would culture be? What would civilization be without memory? Memory is what makes a human being more human. What does it mean to be more human? Is to be open to one another, to each other's sadness, to each other's hope, and to each other's commitment to help overcome difficulties and challenges and then dangers. There are so many of them in the world. Without it, without our work together, who knows how many people would need words of consolation tomorrow. The Armenians to me belong to my inner landscape. We have not assimilated enough that idea that the Armenians too were actually sacrificed by the organized society. So many Armenians could have been saved, should have been saved in those times. The tragedy lasted too long. And therefore, among the Jews themselves later on, we said, look, what happened to the Armenians should not happen to us. And therefore, we should resist right away. So I have a profound feeling of sympathy and comradeship with the Armenians, and they try to fight for their cause.
Ladies and gentlemen, now taking the stage for this evening's main program, please welcome the moderator and managing editor of Washington Week and co-anchor and managing editor of PBS NewsHour, Miss Gwen Eiffel.
I really want to thank 100 Lives and the Harold Pratt House and Not on Our Watch for having us here tonight for this amazing program. But first I have to make a little admission. I was told by John Prendergast that if I came here tonight I could meet the sexiest man alive. And then I discovered he meant Vartan Gregorian. And I was thrilled. So I'm very happy to be here tonight. We're going to get right to our conversation. Our first guest is an accomplished businessman and philanthropist and co-founder of UWC Diljan College. It is a world-class institution in Diljan, Armenia. He is the descendant of a genocide survivor and the visionary co-founder of the initiative which brings us here tonight, 100 Lives. Please welcome Mr. Ruben Bartanian. And our next guest may best be known for his leading roles in a number of award-winning films, but equally as important are his contributions to humanitarian efforts and African aid and development work. He's the co-founder of the Darfur aid organization Not on Our Watch, and he has used his celebrity for good, often despite putting his own safety at risk. To shine a light on modern human rights abuse, Mr. George Clooney.
Hi, you guys.
Howdy.
Howdy.
Y'all wish you were up here, don't you?
I'm a little confused. I realized that you've stolen something from, I'm from Kentucky. We were always, be Kentucky, be alive. And I think that you guys have stolen that.
Now you realize all Kentuckians are Armenians also.
Oh, exactly, that's true.
It's all about Kentucky.
It is always.
Yeah. But it's also about saviors and survivors. It's also about misery and about compassion. And it's about a new way of speaking to all of those issues. I want to start with you, Ruben. I want to ask you where you got this idea from. Why are you doing this? We have heard a lot about it tonight, but personally.
Like I said, personally for me, it's my own family story, but also I believe for our nation, it's very important after 100 years to come out from this victimization process, which is trap. You cannot think always about the past. You need to look at in the future. Looking in the future, you need to remember what happened with you 100 years ago, but you say it's over from point of we are a nation who survived. And I want my son and my grandson to be proud to be Armenian. I remember when my grandfather told me a story about the genocide, how he was survived, what happened to him. He didn't like to talk too much about this, but for me it was very emotional. For me, telling the same story for my grandson will be more difficult. And I won't give him a message, it's happened, and it's a very big tragedy for us, but we're over, and we're a strong nation with big successful stories. Saying again, I want to change this attitude saying, we are successful, we are alive, and we are staying. Despite 75% of Armenians being killed or died, can you imagine a nation who come back after 100 years saying we are alive and we are doing something good? I think it's very positive. It's inspiring me emotionally saying to the world and the other nations, guys, look at us and learn from us. And we're happy to share our experience with all of you because it's happening again and again, and we need to learn from lessons from other nations. We cannot repeat the same mistake. I think it's inspired me from point doing this. I said, it's a life choice for yourself, feeling you're doing something important for not only by yourself, but also for other nations, for other people.
Can I follow up on that? Because I know often for communities who have gone through trauma, it's hard to talk about. You'd rather forget about it. You want to assimilate. What is it about this, about the Armenian genocide, 100 years later, that has Armenians not wanting to just leave it behind?
It's a very good question. By the way, if you look at the history, the first 30, 40 years, Armenians didn't want to talk about the genocide. After maybe 1965, when it was 50-year anniversary, we started to speak about genocide very loudly. It was really very difficult to talk about when your women been raped, you've been killed, you lost your land, you lost your historical places, you lose everything, and talk about how you've been losing is not easy. But at the same time, I think Armenians decided, well, we need to save ourselves. And I think a lot of Armenians put a lot of money, effort, and time in trying to preserve Armenian culture, Armenian history. It was amazing looking at how many Armenians, individuals, doing something which in different part of the world, we would build the schools, we build the churches, we build the institutions like AGBU and others who've been years and years spending money and efforts trying to keep Armenian identity despite all this happened with us. And I think it's the best example, like Nubar said, is super survival, because we've been not first time. And I think for Armenians to keep who we are by our language, our church, our values, our culture, it was very important. So I think it's one of the great example about what is very critical for the nations. We are under big pressure to keep yourself despite all what's happening with you.
George, as you've gotten involved in humanitarian work, I'm sure that there are people around the block and down the line trying to get you involved in their causes as well.
Sure.
You've picked carefully, you've chosen carefully, but why this? What does this have to do with your work in Darfur or Myanmar?
Well, you know, the questions, I mean, it's a tricky thing. We're, early on when I decided that you had to focus on very specific things, you know, and Darfur was something that we thought, you know, when you're famous, the trick is you want to bring attention to things. You can't change policy, you can't do anything. So you can bring attention to it, and it wasn't getting enough attention. We thought, well, we could sort of help that. I wasn't familiar with all the issues of the terminology, like words like genocide bring. It was very hard. I had spoke to the Security Council and tried to, you know, get them to even use the word genocide, which of course they wouldn't and couldn't. And I got to learn about Armenia through a friend of mine named Bob Manoukian, who, in probably picking on my innocence at the time, said, you know some senators, maybe you could talk to them and see if they could talk about the Armenian genocide on the floor of the Senate. So I tried. And,
how did that go?
That didn't play so well.
Yeah.
As you can imagine, it didn't. We have some military bases apparently in Turkey I didn't know about. Incirlik, who knew?
Yeah.
I was shocked. And so, you become sort of informed about Armenia through that and through friendships. And I started, because I was slow to the game on this one. And Armenia, the idea of genocide, just because the word wasn't invented for 30 more years doesn't mean that it didn't happen.
That's not what it was.
And John Prendergast introduced us. And we started talking about the thought that we have a lot of the same ideas of what we want to do. We're looking at the prevention of, we don't want to triage at the end. I think that's silly and too late. And our thought was, let's explore any way we can to expose these things and make them more difficult to happen in the broad daylight, because we know what happens in the darkness. And Ruben has been so instrumental in his ideas of how we can make these things louder. And I thought that's a really great place for us to be, not just to talk about the atrocities, but talk about the heroism of people that had no reason to do it. And I find that that's a, you know, we get so mired down in these horrible stories that sometimes we forget that there were these great heroic moments and these unbelievably brave people. And I think I just thought it was a brilliant idea to not just focus on that 100 years ago, but also to focus on the people doing it now. And
so there's overlap, you think, in your work. There's common there are common goals in your work.
Absolutely. No, this is something is very important. We found this is a common goal about current what's going today, because like using the past, we need to look what's going today in the world, and it's unfortunately a lot of replications coming the same stories, and without doing this together, without talking about this, without recognizing and supporting the people, because one of the idea about this prize, the money will go to continue support this activity, which I think it was very important to say the message. We want to help other people to go in this process much.
I also want to say that, you know, independent of doing this with Ruben, and John and I were working on this, I had, you know, my wife had no idea that I had been meeting with Ruben, and she was in the middle of going to Strasbourg to the international, you know, to the Court of Appeals to fight a really interesting Armenian battle. And, you know, I came back, I went to park my car in LA, and the valet guys are all Armenian, and they came over and they go, "I want to kiss your wife, and don't, you can't pay for the car."
And you said, "Doesn't everybody?"
I was like, everyone has to kiss my wife. But it was very funny.
We joke about this. Now George become Clunian, not anymore Clooney, it's Clunian.
Yeah, we looked at the guest list. There's a lot of IANs at the end.
The Irish thing with IAN doesn't work so well, but whatever. That's for tonight. I'm curious about what you think. How do you sell a topic like genocide? Sell probably sounds too crass, but this is not something people spontaneously want to talk about at a dinner party or even at a cause event. And they also, it's one thing to talk about it from the past and to celebrate an anniversary, and it's another thing to talk about it in the present, as you were seeing in Darfur. But how do you get people to listen when the G word is involved?
Well, it's tricky because apathy is such a big player in all
Right.
this. You know, we had, you know, John and I have a satellite sentinel project, and we have satellite imagery. We've been on the cover of the New York Times. They've used it as evidence, you know, in the International Criminal Court. And over a period of time, we knew it was effective because the attacks were happening now under cloud cover or at night rather than during broad daylight. And we felt that that was a really effective tool for a period of time. But then you realize, and I would imagine that Omar al-Bashir would realize at a time, that if nobody's going to do anything when you actually see that, when you see the bombardment of the Nuba Mountains,
Right.
you see those are innocent people being killed by troops, period. Former Janjaweed troops who are now, you know, they have a new name, but they're the same people. When you see that that just keeps continuing anyway, you realize that, well, then we could just go ahead and do whatever we want. Apathy is the big player here, and it's very difficult to find ways to keep the subject alive. It's hard to do, and we see it all the time. You know, there are very quick hits in the news. As you know, you have to deal with it a lot. It's very hard to keep it sustained, and sustained is the only way it works.
If I may bring the example of what 700 years ago, I think it's a very interesting story, which I'm sure not every Americans know. From 1915, New York Times was the first newspaper to publish articles about the genocide going in the Ottoman Empire. And it was the many publications, and it was the first time we used saying it's a crime against the humanity. And it was money raised around the entire America. Again, it was an amazing campaign. Can you imagine $150 million was raised? But what happened in 1921, everything was stopped, okay? 1921, after that, you will not read anything about genocide. Why? Because the government decided that Turkey is our partner, okay? And this has become the policy not to talk much about this subject anymore. What I'm saying is very important for us, people who really believe it's a key issue, to talk, to discuss, to bring this issue again and again, because sometimes government has different interests, political or military or whatever, economical, and this is very dangerous because it's very dominating from point of the human values. And I think it's very important for us being people who achieve something in their lives, in business or in culture, to try to keep a subject in life, because people don't want to talk about it, you're right, but people need to hear what they don't like sometimes to hear.
And part of what you're trying to do here is kind of undertake an education project. So how do you begin to do that? Is that what the prizes are for? Is that what the award is for?
No, we're doing 3 elements. Like I said, it's a past, is trying to tell the stories of the savage survivors. The current, the present, it's a award people who are doing today, and we're doing also grant projects. For example, we'll do this 100 scholarship for kids from Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Egypt. We'll study free of charge in our school in Dilijan as a scholarship, because the same way Arabs helped us 100 years ago, and help our kids to live life, saying we need to help people who are under pressure now, or they have serious problems, to get educated kids. And this is why one of the reasons our school in Dilijan from the beginning we said it needs to be international. It's a 48 nationalities study together. And kids from Turkey studying now in Armenia, kids from Syria, Israel, Palestine studying together in Dilijan. And I think it's a very important element, bringing kids together, helping them give a good education. And it's about the project about the future, building the future with a new type of the relationship, with new type of attitude, because it's the only way you can change the mentality. You cannot change anything else. You cannot achieve anything without changing mentality. Yeah.
George, is there a trick besides the judicious use of celebrity to get people to pay attention to issues which seem very far away? Sudan is very far away.
Well, I mean, I grew up in the news business. My father was an anchorman for 50 years, you know, and one of the things that you sort of learn, unfortunately, is when it bleeds, it leads, right? When it's the horrors will come out. But the truth of the matter is, you know, we keep going through this. We do it time and time again. After the Holocaust, which was the one that everyone talks about, we said never again. And then we had Cambodia, and then we had Rwanda, and then we had Bosnia. You just keep going back and forth. Darfur, which no one really wants to acknowledge necessarily. So the hard part is, again, to sustain it. So you have to find, I think the education part is a brilliant part of it. It has to become part of our education. For instance, the idea of remembering Armenia, even though it was 100 years ago, the reason you have to do it is because it is part of our history, and it is part of the world's history. And if we don't do it, then when do we start? From 1940, and that's when we're going to start talking about.
But you know, I call it willful forgetting. It's not that we forget simply innocently. We want to forget. We want to move forward.
Sure.
Americans especially aren't particularly interested in reliving bad things. So.
But they do. It's a funny thing. They will for bits of time. I mean, we did the Darfur rally, the Save Darfur rally, in Washington, and there was, I don't know, 100,000 people.
Yeah.
And it was an unbelievable turnout, and everybody, Senator Obama and Senator Clinton and everybody in the world showed up and spoke. And it was that moment where you go, this is it. This is that moment where everything sort of crystallizes, so you got them. And everybody felt it. That's the problem. Because then everybody's like, good, done. Darfur, done. Okay, now what? On to the next thing. And the truth is, it's getting in and doing the nitty-gritty work that it takes for us, for the things that all of us can do. It's also lobbying people in places who can make policy. It's keeping the attention on, Darfur, the interesting thing was it was a culmination of young people and church groups, which are really not necessarily groups that gel.
Overlap.
Yeah. And they were unbelievable in keeping it alive for quite some time. And you have to continue to find roadmaps through that and find ways to keep it, on the tip of your tongue.
You see, I remember in my church it was a big issue for a while, but I haven't heard it talked about a lot. One of the things I find interesting about 100 Lives, Ruben, is that you're trying to find a way to seed it. You're trying to reward people here, there, with smaller grants, with ways of making it a more broad-based conversation. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's true, absolutely. And also we want to make these projects in different parts of the world, showing it's not just word, not just information, but also action. Because I think the action is very important, doing something. It's one of the critical, because we're talking too much sometimes and not doing too much.
What is your ideal for action?
We have a different projects which we're really trying to implement in different parts of the world. For example, I mentioned about the Syria, Iraq, Lebanon. Like in Germany, what Nubar mentioned about his story, we found the hospice, which was the same town as the grandson of this officer living, and we want to rebuild it, saying, okay, we won't say thank you under the name of the grandson. This is the type of story what you try to show every German who don't want to hear about Armenia or about Darfur, saying something happened, by the way. One of your neighbors, grandfather, did something, but now somebody coming saying thank you. That's why we need to prevent the genocide, we need to act when the genocide is happening, but also we need to help after the genocide is over to help people to come out of this victimization feeling, and also saying this thank you. It's creating awareness about something going on. I want to learn more about this. I think, again, one of the points, people, too much information going in their head. They cannot have enough time to read about all these stories about Cambodia or Darfur or any other place too far from them. But getting stories which link to them is making it easier to bring their attention about what's going in some part of the world. That's why I say our idea doing this project also some connections between the different part of the world with what's happening in Armenia or what's happening in other part of the world where there's something going wrong.
George, do you worry that all of these different causes are sucking each other dry, that there's a risk that you're in competition for the same compassion, the same pool of money, the same pool of attention?
Well, I don't know that there's a limit on how much you can care. I don't think that there is. I think that I think we have an incredible capacity to understand complex situations. I think that the mistakes we make is when we think it's too much. When you go, well, they can't handle that. You know, they think, well, they can't handle hearing the truth, or they can't.
For example,
or it's too many. Well, if you know, a big part of what we learned in talking about, like John and I would go to the Nuba Mountains, and you realize that you had to be able to explain to people the Nuba Mountains are different than Abyei, than further south in South Sudan, which was also going through its own crazy times. And people, all you have to do is put a face to those people, and you realize that there's a humanity to it. Because what happens is we generalize constantly. We'll go, like, particularly in the United States, you'll just go, well, that's just Africa. I mean, there's a lot of people that call Africa a country.
Yeah.
You know, the country of Africa.
Yeah.
I mean, that's actually true. That's not just kind of true. And so the idea is you have to say, well, no, this is a people. These are some of the first people of mankind that are being systematically mowed down. And let's show them, you know, and John and I were there the day, a few hours after a really serious bombing, and you know, you show them these kids and you go, now wait a minute, now you're telling me that this is a military base, this had anything to do with it, and I think you're able to build, you know, we showed it in front of the Senate, and I think you have the ability, people have the capacity to do it, and you have the ability to. It's very hard to, again, what we talk about, and I think that why I'm so happy to be here with Ruben, and why what he's doing is so spectacular, is sustaining things is so hard.
Right.
You know, and watching how a news cycle works and how much faster the chain of a news cycle can work in 24-hour news, it gets, you know, it does feel like there's a million tragedies. So you got to pick one and really make it specific.
Ruben, do you feel like there's competition for attention, competition for compassion?
Of course, unfortunately, the world is changing. We're getting more and more social network and show business and becoming dominating. People want to simplify everything. They try to say it's bad, good, white, black, and they try to make it all so simple. It makes their life easier because it's too much information. That's why take the attention of people and really talk about something very serious is really not easy. That's why we need to use whatever instruments, new instrument is coming, we need to use it. We need to be the same professional technology operating, using the old satellites, everything. We need to be prepared in the sense that we cannot use the old instrument, taking people's attention today because the world has changed. But at the same time, we need to talk about the key values. We need to talk about something which is much more serious. It's not about just reality show or something which people easy watching just because it makes difficult for them to understand what's going on. We need to try it. Otherwise, we will know nothing will happen. Without trying, without doing ourselves, nothing will change. Nothing will happen.
You also have to hit people sometimes where it hurts. You know, there's a group of people that won't care, but there's a group of people that do care if they're associated with bad things going on in the earth. You know, we sort of the next step for John and I in our satellite program is following the money. You know, these guys, there's these people who are buying, you know, Antonovs and buying helicopters and buying bombs, and they can't buy them with Sudanese pound on the open market. That you can't use the Sudanese pound. So somehow they're getting that money into a bank, into a third bank and a fourth bank and a fifth bank, and somehow that money is now buying, you know, Chinese bombs and Russian planes, and somehow it's buying those things. Now, those banks are banks that we all use, and we know the people. And when you follow that chain, we've hired forensic accountants, good ones. And when you follow that chain around and down, you can say, well, now wait a minute, guys. This is, these are banks we all know. These are people we know who go to dinners that we go to that don't want to be associated in any way with that. And you could choke things off in a much different way by following the money. So that's a big part of it.
But you choke things off by shaming those people or by government acting?
Well, I mean, first you try shaming them, and then you hope the government follows suit.
Suit.
I mean, honestly, how many times every time we testified in front of the Security Council, and China got up and walked out,
right?
Because they have oil wells, and in fairness, they need oil from the Sudan. They have more cars, you know, bursting on the scene every second. But I mean, we've traveled through Sudan, and it's all Chinese workers that they've brought in. So they have a vested interest. A government has a vested interest in remaining status quo, and so you have to try and good luck shaming China.
Yeah. I want you all to know, I'm going to just pause for a moment to let you know that we're going to take questions in a moment or two from the audience. We want you to participate in this conversation, but I'm going to hog it for a few more moments. But just start thinking about your questions, because they have to be really smart, or I'll shame you. I'm sorry, Ruben, you were going to say?
No, it's fine. Let's.
No, that's okay.
I'm feeling
good
it.
shame.
Right.
Not you.
We have time for one more question.
I want to ask you to talk a little bit more about the Aurora Prize and what your goal, your dream is for it, because it's $1 million is a lot of money, and a lot of competition probably for it. But you must have in your mind an idea about what you want it to be.
Yeah, I think it's one of the key points that we try to bring during today's presentation. It's a second chance issue, which we believe is a very important element, because it's not so obvious when you get some victimization process coming back to normal life. And this is, again, helping people. It really requires a lot of efforts, not only by financial, but also psychology, people, humanity needs to be actively involved. That's why our Aurora Prize is recognition of people who are doing this, but also financial supporting them, but also trying to, in general, create a movement about this humanitarian action, saying we say we need to help other people to get back to normal life and be successful after they survive or after something happened to them. That's why our prize, we hope, will become really global prize, which will be recognized worldwide, and the people who get this prize will have the power to attract more people and more resources to do what they're already doing. And it's not only financial, like I said, it's $1 million big money, but simply it's not enough money. We all know how much money we all need to stop some of the activity or finding more information what's going on in some of the places. That's why our hope with this prize will recognize these important people, and it will help them to create more opportunity for them to get more done.
Most interesting thing about it to me is that you're remembering the past as a way of planting seeds for the future.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the future for a moment. I was telling George and Ruben backstage that I was in Selma last weekend and got to cover the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. And one of the things that struck me the most about it were the people in the crowd. And that as you drove from Montgomery to Selma, that there were rental cars, vans full of young people who were, for whatever reason, motivated to be there. And whether it was Ferguson or whether it was, whatever it was, they are the future of whatever civil rights movement still exists. So as you think about your causes and your goals, and you think about setting the stage for the people who have more energy to continue it, how much are young people central to this, and how do you get them engaged?
Well, I mean, if you look back at probably almost every movement that's ever really worked,
Sure.
it's run by young people. It's led by young people. If you look at what happened, you know, in the 60s, the anti-Vietnam War movement, I mean, you can go through all of the things that you look back and you think, young people took that up. Civil rights movement were young people. You know, Martin Luther King was a young man, quite honestly. But even much younger people. John Lewis, you know, Congressman Lewis was a very young man when he was 24, I think.
25.
You know, it's just, So I find that they're the ones who actually do understand that they're going to have to carry it. And it's nice, what I love about what Ruben's saying is that we actually have to find a way to, water that and let those people know that that's the right thing to do. That's the way to go. The sitting at home, playing video games isn't going to cut it. You got to get in it. You got to get involved. And, it's going to be the young people.
Absolutely, I totally agree. And we are doing this all education projects in Armenia and in Russia with my wife. And we all see this energy, inspiration. People really, we want to lead by example. The one point we need to understand, it cannot be leading by wording, it needs to leading by example. The school what we started in Armenia, we got 200 people who support the school, okay, and from worldwide, not Armenian only. And this is an amazing example for people. It can be done. It can be done in Armenia, something that nobody believed can be done.
They're not waiting for you to lead the way. They're already ahead of you.
Yeah, but now, absolutely. And now, in the school, you're going as kids, 16 years old, you'll be amazed how they patient, and they have an inspiration. We're trying to change the world. All they dream is change the world. And we're coming from different countries together, thinking about how we can change, how we can make the world better. United World College system is amazing because we really collect these kids from different places, and we're coming with the big belief we can change the world. We need to help them.
Changing the world, that's a nice goal. I'm going to open this for questions now. And all I ask is that you identify yourself and that you make it a question, and then I'll decide who gets to answer it. We'll start right here, and then we'll make our way over.
I'm first.
Could you stand?
Could I stand? Yes. I like the darkness. I thought the state motto of Kentucky was "Down the stretch they come," but that's a little derby's coming up. Everybody.
It didn't seem right here.
Yeah.
Tell everybody who you.
Oh yes, I'll let the voices in my head tell you. It's Richard Roth of CNN. George, content I'm told is king, and you have influence in other places. It seems like young people and a lot of times get their messages from movies. I mean, have you talked about or met with anyone regarding a thriller regarding the history of Armenia and relate it to perhaps someone today, descendant or otherwise, in a way of getting the message out?
No, I haven't. Movies take it's a tricky thing with films. It's funny, looking at what Aurora did with that film. When you think about that kind of money, was it $20 million? That's $1 billion or something now. It's insane what they were able to accomplish. Good or bad, Birth of a Nation certainly wasn't particularly good for mankind. So you can.
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, you can work it either way. But there's an awful lot of good that you can do in television as well, not just films. It's finding the right storyline and finding the right thing. Again, it's sort of like, you have to attach it to someone. Aurora is someone that it's a beautiful story to attach it to. So it'd be nice if that's a story that was made again. That would be a nice one to do.
Another question. Where is my microphone? Oh.
Is this working?
Now it's
Susanna Schrobsdorf from Time Magazine. Hello. I had a question, I guess, we're 20 years out since Hillary Clinton talked about how women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. And I think we're kind of having a moment where violence against women is in the news. I think this weekend we had International Women's Day, and women in Turkey protested against what's called femicide, which is maybe something you want to comment on, like, does that exist? Does it exist? And how do you harness the energy when something's in the news like this and when there's a sort of natural moment for protest or uprising? How do you harness that, similar to civil rights?
Ruben?
You want to take that one?
I prefer it.
Well, it's obviously, one of the important things is that we forget that, or we sometimes don't understand that rape is actually used as a tool of genocide. It isn't just this, rowdy bunch doing horrible things. They're actually doing specifically designed to destroy an entire race of people. And we have to continue to fight that battle. We have to continue to remind ourselves and everyone else that this is not just a crime. This is a crime against humanity, and it has to be treated as such. And we go through this a lot. If you look at, certainly in Darfur, but you can go down the list and you can see it through every single one of these genocides. That was one of the tools. So women's rights as a human right, of course, needs to be always addressed when we're talking about genocide. I think it's one of the major players, one of the major topics when we're talking about it. I think John and I address it almost every time. We just wrote an op-ed piece in New York Times about it.
Next question.
I shouldn't say New York Times in front of Time Magazine.
She can take it.
She can take it.
There's someone right here. There's a microphone coming to you, sir.
Canada. Oh, there we go. I went to Armenian school in Canada, and growing up, ancient history class was all about how wonderful the ancient story of Armenia was, and then the modern history was all about death and despair. And I'm slightly ashamed to say that I kind of tuned out because it was such a negative theme. And what I love about this project is it's about the heroes and about the hope. And Ruben, I'm curious to know, have you always thought this way, or was there something that changed that gave you this idea?
But the think positively is not easy. You know, usually to make the film about negative is much easier. To talk negative stories, it's obvious. To writing negatives is much compelling, much more richer by stories you can make. And Armenians' history is amazing. If you look what we've been happening with us, all history of 5,000 years. We've been between the Roman Empire and Parthians, between the Persians and Byzantium, with the Ottoman Empire, Byzantium. We've been in a crossroad between the different culture, different civilization, and we've been always good from point not being only surviving but being successful. Can you imagine Armenians going Singapore, Burma, when many of people never go to the main city, which is not far from away villages? That's why Armenians being positive despite all this tragedy. So I believe we need to bring back this type of attitude, what we can do, succeed. We become first Christian country. We made our own alphabet. We made the publication of the first book in 1612 after the 20 years of the Gutenberg Prize. And this was a small nation living in the Middle East, went to the Poland and published the book because we believe it was very important. So in Armenians, we keep this pioneering, thinking out of the box, being really out of comfort zone. The question is attitude, because of what happened in the 20th century, bring us a little bit back, say, oh yeah, it's too bad, we're suffering, we're surviving, and coming back saying, we are alive. I think it was very important for me, and I said, like I said in my speech, personally and for the nation, just getting out from this trap, being always victimization and trying to think we're a loser. No, we're a winner. This is the main message which I want to get. We are the winner, despite what happened with us.
I suspect a lot of people tuned out of the bad news for a while, and they're ashamed to admit it, and only now are coming back. This gentleman here has been very patient, and if you will be patient enough for the microphone to get to you.
He's very tall. Yes, very tall.
Yeah.
Also very loud, but for interpreters. First of all, I have to say on a personal note, as a Bosnian, I immensely value what you do and identify with it. But also, my name is Refi Kodjic. I come from the International Center for Transitional Justice, and we are an organization that is working on exactly that, on trying to work for accountability and acknowledgement for mass atrocity to prevent future abuses. And we find that at the root of recurring conflict is denial of mass atrocity. And I think that there is no example of sustained denial of genocide as Armenian genocide is. So my question is to Mr. Bartanian, what strategies do we use? How do we strategize to fight the ongoing denial as something that fuels instability and fuels conflict?
Like in our project, we're recognizing what was done good in a very horrible time. And this is why I think one of the vehicles which we're trying to influence this whole situation, saying this is important element of the telling the full story what's happened. And I believe it's a very important element for Turkey and for, by the way, for Russia, the same problem I always mention is two countries which facing big challenge. Recognition is very important, not from the outside nations, from themselves, because it's helping them to become out of this trap to denial, because it's what is good, what is bad. Like in Russia, Stalin is a continued #1 hero in a Soviet system in Russia, because people believe he was a very good manager, and they don't care how many people died during this time. And this is, if nobody will say it's bad, and it was bad for us, not for others, it was bad for Russians who lost 50 million people between the two world wars, I think it's very difficult to go forward. As I say, I hope this open discussion, telling the good story. By the way, we have here Gurgen Sarkisyan from Canada. His family was saved by Turkish family, and this is an amazing story which showing it's not a question about nationality or religion, it's a question of the human behavior. By our angle, we're trying to bring to the discussion about denial and recognition, saying we're recognizing the good part, and we hope that other people will be brave and smart and strong to, in the end, come up saying it's important for us to go over this and go to the future with a new understanding of the past.
I'm being told no more questions, sadly, but I'm going to give George a chance to answer one final one from me, which is this idea of a call. Yeah, you thought you were off the hook.
I was this close.
So about them all.
Yeah, I get that one a lot.
Tell me about the call to action, what the call to action should be after you launch a project like this to get attention, to make sure that there's impact, to make sure that that goals are achieved.
Well, it's a good question because it changes. It's such a fluid thing, a call to action. You'll see news stories flare up, and the call to action is incredibly intense. And we've seen it over the time. You've seen it, over your years, many, many, many times. It's much harder to do when there isn't. It's much better to do it. It would last longer. So we're not sure. It's one of those things. It's a fluid thing. John and I we'll plan trips trying to weave a time to talk about whether we've gone to the Nuba Mountains or we've gone to Abyei or one of the places we've gone to. We'll go at a time where we're trying to weave between, the Arab Spring story being the biggest story out there, where you can find ways, to last longer than a single news cycle. And it's a very tricky thing to do. The call to action, though, what I love about this idea is you're saying to people, okay, the prize is fantastic because it'll inspire people, and people will come forward that might not necessarily. But the one that's really inspiring is this school and taking these young people. Young people have to be taught to hate. That's a learned skill, a terrible skill, but it's a learned skill. So you need to finding the young people and putting them all in a room together and saying, you guys all get along, this is all going to work out. Those are the closest things you can do to stopping the kinds of atrocities we've seen. It's the best thing you can do. We've seen it all over South Sudan at the times when it works best. We saw it for a period of time in Rwanda, when it works, when you put people in the rooms together. It's an ongoing process, and we will fail more often than we succeed. But that doesn't mean that we won't eventually succeed, and it doesn't mean you don't keep trying.
Perfect note on which to end this conversation. George Clooney, Ruben Bartanian, thank you both
Thank you
so much.
Thank you.
I'm buying dinner.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. You're in trouble. You're in big trouble.
Yeah, I want to say thank you for all of you to coming, George, thank you, and Glenn, thank you to organize the discussion. I think it's very important. It's an honor to be joined this evening by such a remarkable audience, and it's my hope that together we can work to preserve the memory of those who lost their lives in the genocide and take the steps to prevent this atrocities from happening again. So many people owe their survival to the strength and generosity of others. It's a time to acknowledge that we are united by shared history and common thread, which will not be forgotten. We are also united by gratitude, a fabric that can bind us together even more strongly wherever we are in the world. 100 years after Armenians were saved by the courage and humanity of strangers and institutions, it is the time to give something back. I want to thank you all for coming. And now it's bringing to me great pleasure to introduce tonight's musical and final guest. Please put your hands together for Grammy Award-nominated opera singer and fellow Armenian, is Isabel Bagragarian. Please.
Is the ethnomusicologist and priest who was one of the very first intellectuals to be deported on April 24, 1915. This song, Lele Aman, has come to symbolize the lament that survivors of the genocide, including my own grandparents, sang for the loved ones they left behind and yearning for the land that they left behind. After 100 years of not only survival, but thriving also, my hope is that we can go back to considering this song as the original love song that it was meant to be and become a symbol of rebirth.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this evening. Please follow the exit at the rear of the room